I'm talking to you. What are you doing here? Answer me. Get up, now, or you're in trouble. Don't you ignore me. Stand up.
The park was silent, a sanctuary of golden leaves and soft wind, until Officer Harlan Kane decided to break the peace. He saw an old black man sitting on a bench feeding birds, and he saw only a target, someone to bully, someone to dominate. He saw the color of the man's skin and assumed he was a vagrant, a criminal in waiting. He slapped the cuffs on with a sneer, ignoring the man's calm warnings. He didn't know that the man he was arresting was Darius Vale, a retired police chief with decades of service and a Medal of Valor. He didn't know he was arresting a legend, and he certainly didn't know that by the time the sun set, his career would be over, and a war would begin that would leave one of them in a wheelchair and the other standing tall. This is the story of how arrogance met its match. The afternoon sun in Oak Haven was a pale, diluted gold filtering through the turning leaves of the massive oak trees in Whispering Pines Park. It was a gated community's public face, manicured, silent, and excessively orderly. For Darius Vale, it was the closest thing he had found to peace since leaving the chaotic, blood-slicked streets of Detroit. At 68, Darius was a man who carried his history in his posture. He sat on the wrought iron bench with a straight spine, his shoulders broad and set, a habit from decades of wearing a Kevlar vest. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a crisp white button-down. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine that reflected the autumn sky. To anyone with eyes, he looked like a grandfather taking a moment to breathe. To anyone with a soul, he looked like a man who deserved his rest. On his lap sat a small paper sack of premium birdseed, a mix of sunflower hearts, millet, and crushed peanuts. He didn't buy the cheap stuff. "There you are," Darius rumbled, his voice a deep, gravelly bass that seemed to vibrate the air around him. "Don't fight. There's enough for everyone." He scattered a handful of seeds near the toe of his Oxford shoe. A flurry of wings descended. Sparrows, a bold blue jay, and his favorite, a bright red northern cardinal that he had secretly named Red. Darius watched them, his dark eyes softening. For decades, his eyes had scanned crowds for weapons, for nervous ticks, for the flash of a muzzle. Now he just wanted to watch the birds eat. The peace was shattered not by a noise, but by a presence. A shadow fell over the bench, blocking the sun. The gravel crunched, a heavy, deliberate sound. Military-style boots. Darius didn't look up immediately. He finished dusting his hands in a slow, methodical movement. He took a breath, smelling the cheap cologne and the metallic tang of gun oil, before he even saw the uniform. "You! Get up!" The voice was young, reedy, and vibrating with an unearned sense of power. Darius slowly turned his head. Standing 5 feet away was Officer Harlan Kane. He looked to be in his early 20s with a buzz cut that was a week too long and a uniform that strained at the buttons not from muscle, but from a softness he tried to hide with a tactical vest overloaded with gear. He had a taser, a baton, 2 spare magazines, a radio, a tourniquet, and a handgun that looked too big for his hip. "Afternoon, officer," Darius said, his voice level. "Can I help you?" "I said get up," Kane barked, stepping closer. The birds scattered in a panic of wings. Darius watched them go, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I'm resting, son," Darius said. "Is there a problem?" "Don't call me son," Kane snapped. His hand drifted to his belt, hovering near the taser. "We've had reports, vagrants, loitering, drug activity in the park." Darius looked around the empty park. "I see. And I fit the description." "You fit the profile," Kane said, his eyes scanning Darius with open disdain. "Expensive coat, sitting on a bench in the middle of the day, probably stolen. Let's see some ID." Darius sighed, the sound of a man who has had this conversation 1,000 times. "Officer, I live 3 streets over, 405 Elm Street. I'm a retired civil servant. I'm just feeding the birds." "Feeding wildlife is a violation of city ordinance," Kane lied. And refusing to identify yourself to a law enforcement officer is an arrestable offense. Stand up now. Darius calculated the distance. He assessed Kane's stance. The boy's weight was all wrong, too far forward. If Darius wanted to, he could sweep Kane's leg and have him pinned in seconds. But Darius wasn't that man anymore, and he knew that a black man fighting a cop in Oak Haven would end up dead, not vindicated. Darius stood up slowly, unfolding his 6'2" frame. He towered over Kane. "I'm going to reach for my wallet," Darius said, narrating his movements. "A survival habit. It is in my back right pocket." "Don't you move!" Kane yelled, panic flaring in his eyes at Darius's size. "Hands on your head! Interlock your fingers!" "Officer, this is unnecessary." "Do it!" Kane screamed, his hand unholstering the taser and pointing it at Darius's chest. The red laser dot danced on Darius's expensive wool coat. Darius froze. He looked at the laser, then he looked at Kane. "You are making a mistake," Darius said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "A very expensive mistake. Turn around." Kane advanced, shoving Darius hard against the bench. "You're under arrest for loitering, resisting, and disorderly conduct." Kane grabbed Darius's wrists, wrenching them behind his back. He slapped the handcuffs on tight, too tight. The metal bit into the bone. "These are too tight," Darius stated. "Check the spacing. You're supposed to be able to fit a pinky finger between the cuff and the wrist." "Shut up," Kane grunted, shoving Darius forward. "You don't tell me how to do my job." "You're going to the station, Grandpa. Let's see how smart you are in a holding cell." As Kane marched Darius toward the patrol car, a Dodge Charger with the engine idling, Darius saw a neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, walking her poodle. She stopped, staring in horror. Darius gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Don't worry," the nod said. "I've got this." But inside, the fire was kindling. It wasn't the rage of a criminal. It was the cold, hard fury of a master craftsman watching an apprentice burn down the workshop. The ride to the precinct was a display of petty tyranny. Kane drove aggressively, braking hard at stop signs to make Darius jerk forward in the back seat. The separation screen was scratched and dirty. "You comfortable back there?" Kane taunted, looking in the rearview mirror. "Not so tough now, are you? Bet you thought you could just waltz into Oak Haven and do whatever you want." "I bought my house in Oak Haven," Darius said calmly. "I paid cash." Kane laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "Yeah, right, drug money. Or did you rob a bank back in the day?" Darius didn't answer. He was memorizing Kane's badge number. He was noting the procedural violations in his head. 1. No Miranda rights read. 2. Excessive force with restraints. 3. Lack of probable cause. 4. Unsafe transport. They arrived at the Oak Haven police station, a clean, modern building of brick and glass. It was quiet. This wasn't the chaotic precinct Darius had once commanded. This was a library with guns. Kane hauled Darius out of the car, gripping his arm tightly. He paraded him through the back door, chin up, looking for applause. The booking area was staffed by Sergeant Riley Jenkins. Darius knew the type immediately. Decades on the force, tired, cynical, but competent. She was sipping coffee and reading a report. "Look what I caught, Sarge," Kane announced, shoving Darius toward the counter. "Found him in Whispering Pines, refused ID, resisting, belligerent." Jenkins didn't look up at first. "Name?" "Wouldn't give it," Kane said. "John Doe." "My name is Darius Vale." His voice filled the room. Sergeant Riley Jenkins stopped. Her pen hovered over the paper. That voice, it had a cadence, a command that you didn't hear often in Oak Haven. She looked up. She saw the coat. She saw the dignified face, the graying beard, the eyes that held a storm of intelligence. And then she saw the handcuffs. She squinted. "Vale." Darius Vale. That's correct, Sergeant, Darius said politely. I believe we met briefly at the Tri-State Law Enforcement Conference in Chicago. You were there with Captain Henderson. The color drained from Sergeant Riley Jenkins' face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What?" Kane asked, looking between them, a frown creasing his forehead. "Sarge, he's just a perp. I'm going to throw him in cell 2. "Kane!" Jenkins came around the desk, her hands shaking slightly. "Take those cuffs off right now." "What?" "Why, he's under arrest." "I said take them off." Jenkins roared. The sound echoed off the cinder block wall, startling the dispatcher in the corner. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Kane stepped back confused. "He's nobody. He was feeding birds." "This is Chief Darius Vale," Jenkins hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Darius. "Retired Chief of Police of the Detroit 12th Precinct. He is the man who wrote the standard operating procedure for urban de-escalation. He is a legend, you idiot, Kane." Kane froze. He looked at Darius. The vagrant was gone. In his place stood a titan. Darius looked at Kane, his expression unreadable. "The keys, officer. My wrists are swelling." Kane fumbled for his keys. He couldn't find the hole. His hands were shaking. The power dynamic had flipped so violently he was getting whiplash. The cuffs clicked open. Darius rubbed his wrists, inspecting the red indentations. "Thank you, Sergeant. Now is Nolan Callahan in?" Yes, sir," Jenkins stammered. "I'll get him. Nolan and I go way back," Darius said to the room at large. "I was his training officer years ago." Kane looked like he was going to vomit. Minutes later, Chief Nolan Callahan burst into the booking room. He was a balding man with a soft midsection, a man who had moved to the suburbs to escape the stress of the city. He looked at Darius, then at Kane, then back at Darius. "Darius," Callahan breathed. "I have no words." "I have a few," Darius said dryly. "But let's talk in your office, and bring Officer Kane." Inside the office, the dressing down was legendary. "He profiled me." "Nolan," Darius said, sitting in the leather guest chair while Kane stood at attention, sweating through his uniform. He saw a black man in a coat and decided I was a criminal. He didn't ask questions. He didn't investigate. He escalated. "Kane, what the hell were you thinking?" Callahan demanded, slamming his hand on the desk. "He looks suspicious, Chief," Kane mumbled, his defiance wilting but still present. He was loitering. "I was sitting on a bench," Darius snapped. "That is what benches are for." Darius stood up and walked over to Kane. He leaned in close. "You wear that badge like a crown," Darius whispered. "But it's a burden. It's a service. You think you're a wolf, son? You're not. You're just a scared boy with a gun. And that makes you dangerous." "I want him suspended," Darius told Callahan, "pending a full internal investigation. And I want a written apology." "Done," Callahan said immediately. "Kane, give me your badge and gun. You're on unpaid leave effective immediately." Kane's face twisted in hate. He unclipped his gun belt and slammed it onto the desk. He ripped the badge off his shirt, tearing a button. "This is bull," Kane spat. "You're taking his side because he's a chief. He's just an old man." "Get out," Callahan said. Kane turned to leave, but he paused at the door. He looked at Darius. "You think this is over?" Kane said, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just come into my town and humiliate me?" "It's not your town, Kane," Darius said. "It's the people's town. Now get out before I add insubordination to your file." Kane left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. "I'm sorry, Darius," Callahan said, wiping his brow. "He's got problems. I'll handle him." "You better," Darius warned. "Because if he comes near me again, I won't be calling you. I'll be calling my lawyers. And Nolan, you know how I handle threats." "How?" Callahan nodded. He knew. Darius walked out of the station a free man. But he felt the weight of the encounter. He knew men like Kane. They didn't learn lessons. They nursed grudges. And Darius was right. The war had just begun. As time passed, the leaves in whispering pines turned from gold to brown. Darius tried to return to his routine, but the peace was gone. It started with small things. One morning, Darius woke up to find his garbage cans overturned, trash strewn across his manicured lawn, coffee grounds and eggshells smeared on his driveway. Raccoons, he told himself. But raccoons didn't slash tires. Days later, he came out to his vintage 1968 Mustang, his pride and joy, to find the sidewalls of both rear tires sliced open. It was a precise cut, a knife. Darius stood in his driveway, the cold wind biting his face. He looked down the street. A dark sedan was parked 2 blocks away. As soon as Darius looked at it, the engine started, and it pulled away slowly. He recognized the car. It was Kane's personal vehicle, a black Chevy Impala. Darius called Callahan. "I can't prove it was him, Darius," Callahan said, sounding tired on the phone. "I questioned him. He has an alibi. His mom says he was home all night." "His mom is lying," Darius said. "Nolan, he's escalating. You know the pattern. I have him on suspension, Darius. I can't put a detail on your house for slashed tires. I don't have the manpower." "Fine," Darius said. "I'll handle my own security." Darius called a local contractor he trusted. By the end of the week, 405 Elm Street was a fortress. High-definition night vision cameras were installed at every corner, motion sensor floodlights, a reinforced steel core for the front door frame. But Kane wasn't done. He had friends on the force, friends like Officer Sterling. Later, Darius was driving to the grocery store. He was obeying the speed limit, signaling every turn. Blue lights flashed behind him. Darius pulled over. He kept his hands on the wheel. He started the recording app on his phone and placed it in the cup holder, screen down but microphone up. Officer Sterling waddled up to the window. "License and registration," Sterling said, smirking. "Reason for the stop?" Darius asked. "Tail lights out," Sterling said. "They were working when I left the driveway minutes ago," Darius said. "Well, they ain't working now. Step out of the vehicle." Darius stepped out. Sterling walked to the back of the Mustang. He held his heavy maglite flashlight. Crack. The sound of plastic shattering was unmistakable. "Look at that," Sterling said, pointing to the fresh hole in the red plastic, shards still falling onto the asphalt. "Busted. That's a safety violation." "And is that the smell of alcohol I detect?" Darius stared at Sterling. "I haven't had a drink in years, Sterling. And we both know you just broke that light. My dash cam is running, by the way, rear-facing." Sterling's smirk faltered. He glanced at the rear window. A small camera lens blinked red. "Get out of here," Sterling muttered, shoving the license back at Darius. "Consider this a warning." "Warning received," Darius said. He drove home, his heart pounding. They were trying to frame him. A DUI charge would ruin his reputation, maybe even affect his pension. They were trying to destroy him. That night, Darius sat in his study looking at the footage from the dashcam. It clearly showed Sterling swinging the flashlight. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number in Chicago. "The Cochran firm. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Quinn Vale," Darius said. "Tell her it's her father and tell her to bring the war chest." Quinn arrived the next day. She was 32, sharp as a tack, and possessed a fury that made grown men tremble. She drove a Porsche Cayenne and wore a suit that screamed billable hours. She set up a command center in Darius's dining room. "This is systematic harassment," Quinn said, reviewing the footage. Title 42, Section 1983. Deprivation of rights under color of law. We can sue the department, the city, and Kane personally. "I don't just want a lawsuit, Quinn," Darius said, looking out the window at the darkening street. "I want to stop him. He's going to hurt someone. If not me, then the next black man he sees in the park." "We need to flush him out," Quinn said. "Make a public statement. Force Callahan to fire him." "There's a town hall meeting tomorrow night," Darius said. "Callahan will be there." "Perfect." Quinn smiled a cold, predatory smile. "Let's go make a scene." But they didn't know that Kane was watching. He was parked down the street using binoculars. He saw Quinn arrive. He saw the files. "Lawyers," Kane spat, sitting in the dark cab of his truck. He took a swig from a flask of whiskey. "They think they can use the law. I am the law." He reached under his seat and pulled out a burner phone. He typed a message to a private group chat titled, "The Blue Shield." "Target is bringing in legal. Need to accelerate timeline. Who's with me?" 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. "We got your back, brother. Let's teach them a lesson." The storm was coming, and this time it wouldn't be just a broken tail light. The Oak Haven Community Center was a brick-and-mortar testament to the town's wealth. Vaulted ceilings, polished mahogany floors, and a scent of beeswax and old money. On a typical night, the town hall meeting would be a sleepy affair, discussing zoning laws for fence heights or the budget for the annual Tulip Festival. Tonight, however, the air was electric. Word had spread. Darius Vale sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his hands resting on his knees. Beside him sat Quinn, a shock in a silk blouse, her laptop connected to the projector system. The room was packed. Neighbors who had seen the police cruisers parked outside Darius's house for weeks whispered behind their hands. Chief Nolan Callahan sat at the long table on the stage, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Beside him was the mayor, a nervous man deeply concerned with property values. "The floor is open for new business," the mayor announced, his voice wavering. Quinn stood up. She didn't walk to the microphone. She marched. "My name is Quinn Vale," she began, her voice projecting clearly without the need for the mic at first. "I am an attorney with the Cochran firm in Chicago, and I am here to represent my father, Chief Darius Vale, regarding a systemic campaign of harassment by officers of this precinct." A murmur ran through the crowd. "We are aware of the complaint," Callahan said quickly, leaning into his microphone. "As I told your father, Ms. Vale, these are internal personnel matters. We are investigating Officer Kane's conduct." "Investigation is a slow word, Chief," Quinn said, plugging the HDMI cable into her laptop. "Let's speed it up." The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. The audio hissed, then popped. It was the dashcam footage from Darius's Mustang. The timestamp was clearly visible. The video showed the sunlit street, the blue lights, and then Officer Sterling walking to the back of the car. The audience watched in stunned silence as Sterling looked around, raised his heavy mag light, and swung. Crack! The sound was amplified by the auditorium speakers. It sounded like a gunshot. "Oops!" Sterling's voice sneered from the speakers. "Busted!" The crowd gasped. Mrs. Whitaker, the neighbor with the poodle, covered her mouth. "Oh my heavens," she whispered loudly. Quinn paused the video on Sterling's smirking face. "This," Quinn said, pointing at the screen, "is not policing. This is racketeering. This is a gang with badges. My father was stopped for a broken tail light that was broken during the stop by Officer Sterling, a known associate of Officer Harlan Kane." She clicked a slide. A timeline appeared. Illegal detention of Darius Vale. Vandalism of Vale residence. Trash. Vandalism of vehicle. Tires slashed. Fraudulent traffic stop and property damage. "We have sworn affidavits," Quinn continued, "from 3 neighbors who saw a black Chevy Impala registered to Harlan Kane parked on Elm Street during the times of the vandalism." She turned to face Callahan. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan. "Chief Callahan," Quinn said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You have a rogue element in your department, a racist, vindictive cell that targets citizens. If Kane and Sterling are not terminated effective immediately, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit against this town that will bankrupt Oak Haven. I will sue for the department's budget. I will sue for your pension. I will own this town hall by the time I am done." Callahan was sweating profusely. The mayor looked like he was about to faint. The public pressure was palpable. People were pulling out their phones, live streaming the moment. "I have seen enough." Callahan stood up. "Officer Sterling is hereby terminated, effective immediately, and I am formally upgrading Officer Kane's suspension to termination, pending the final paperwork tomorrow morning. We will purge this corruption." The room erupted in applause. Darius didn't clap. He just watched Callahan, his eyes narrowing. He knew that cornering a rat didn't make it disappear, it made it bite. Miles away in a dimly lit basement apartment that smelled of stale beer and gun oil, Harlan Kane watched the live stream on his phone. His face was a mask of contorted fury. He watched the town he thought he owned turn against him. He watched his chief, the man he was supposed to trust, throw him to the wolves. "Terminated," Kane whispered. He threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. He wasn't a cop anymore. The badge was gone. The pension was gone. His identity, the only thing that made him feel like a man, was stripped away by an old black man and his lawyer daughter. The burner phone on the table buzzed. It was the group chat, the Blue Shield. "Kane, did you see that? We have to move." A pause, then a reply from Sterling. "It's over, Grady. Callahan fired me. I'm out. I'm deleting this chat. Don't contact me." One by one, they abandoned him. The brotherhood evaporated the moment the heat got too high. Kane stared at the screen, his breathing jagged. He was alone. "No," he hissed, standing up. He walked to his closet. He pushed aside the hanging clothes and unlocked a heavy steel safe. Inside lay his personal arsenal, an AR-15 with a holographic sight, a pump-action shotgun, a tactical vest he had bought online. Illegal for civilians, but he had kept it. "I'm not the criminal," he muttered, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mind fracturing under the pressure of his own narcissism. "They are. They invaded my town." He grabbed the rifle. He grabbed the vest. He reached into the back of the safe and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, taking a long, burning pull. "If I'm going down," he said to the empty room, "I'm taking the chief with me." But he didn't mean Callahan. He meant the real chief, the one on Elm Street. The storm hit Oak Haven in the dead of night. It was a violent late autumn squall, stripping the last of the leaves from the trees and lashing the streets with freezing rain. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the colonial houses at 405 Elm Street. The house was dark, but it wasn't asleep. Darius Vale sat in the armchair in the living room facing the front door. He wasn't wearing his pajamas. He was wearing dark cargo pants and a black tactical sweater. On the side table next to a cold cup of tea sat his Sig Sauer P226, his service weapon from Detroit. He knew decades of police work gives a man a sixth sense. It's a prickle on the back of the neck, a taste of copper in the mouth. The public humiliation at the town hall wouldn't end it. It would accelerate it. Kane was a narcissist. Darius had seen the type 100 times. A narcissist doesn't accept defeat. He seeks annihilation. "Dad." Quinn stood at the top of the stairs wrapped in a robe. She looked small in the shadows. "Go back to bed, Quinn," Darius said softly. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "The storm," Darius lied. "Just checking the windows." "You're expecting him, aren't you?" Quinn descended the stairs, her voice trembling slightly. Darius didn't answer immediately. He picked up the SIG, checked the chamber, brass verified, and set it back down. "Kane has nothing left to lose," Darius said. "A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing on earth. Go to the safe room in the basement, Quinn. Lock the door. Do not come out until I say my code phrase." "Dad, I'm not leaving you." Darius's voice was a command, a whip crack that silenced her. "This isn't a debate. This is a tactical situation. If he comes to kill. I need to know you are safe so I can do what I need to do. Now, go." Quinn hesitated, tears stinging her eyes. She saw the shift in her father. The gentle bird watcher was gone. The chief was back. She nodded, turned, and ran softly to the basement door. Darius waited. The motion sensor light on the driveway flickered on. The rain was coming down in sheets. blurring the camera feed on Darius's iPad, but he saw it. A shape moving between the hedges. Not a casual walk, a tactical approach, low crouch, weapon raised. Darius tapped the screen. One target, heavy weaponry. He brought a rifle, Darius whispered. Coward. Darius stood up and moved silently into the hallway. He didn't turn on the lights. He knew every creak of his floorboards. He knew the layout of his home better than Kane knew his own soul. Crash. The glass of the kitchen door at the back of the house shattered. Kane didn't pick the lock. He smashed his way in. He wanted terror. He wanted them to know he was there. Darius heard the crunch of boots on the kitchen tile. He heard the heavy, wet breathing of a man, adrenaline dumping. "Vale!" Kane screamed. The sound was ragged, slurring slightly. He was drunk. "Come out, old man. Time for your medicine." Darius pressed his back against the wall of the dining room. He held his breath. Kane was moving through the kitchen, sweeping the rifle barrel back and forth, knocking pots and pans off the counters. Clang. Crash. "You think you can take my life?" Kane roared. Blam. He fired a shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. "I am the police. I am the authority." Darius closed his eyes for a second, centering himself. Target is intoxicated, erratic, heavy firepower. He is sweeping right to left. Darius moved. He didn't run away. He hunted. He slipped through the living room shadows, circling around to flank the kitchen entrance. Kane kicked open the door to the dining room. Lightning flashed, illuminating him. He looked like a nightmare, soaked to the bone, eyes wild. The AR-15 held awkwardly against his tactical vest. "Where are you?" Kane taunted. "Hiding under the bed?" "Drop the weapon, Grady," Darius said. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Kane spun around, firing blindly into the dark living room. Bam! 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 Bullets tore through the drywall, shattering a lamp, shredding the sofa. "Show yourself!" Kane screamed, his magazine clicking empty. He fumbled to reload, his wet hand slipping on the metal. That was the moment Darius stepped out of the shadows. He didn't shoot. He moved with a terrifying speed for a man of 68. He closed the distance in 3 strides. Kane got the fresh magazine in. But before he could raise the barrel, Darius was there. Darius grabbed the barrel of the rifle with his left hand, forcing it up toward the ceiling. With his right hand, he drove the butt of his pistol into Kane's solar plexus. Oof! Kane doubled over, the air rushing out of him. Darius swept Kane's leg hard. Kane's boots lost traction on the polished floor, and he went down, crashing heavily onto his back. The rifle skittered across the floor. Kane scrambled, reaching for a backup piece, a Glock tucked into his belt. "Don't," Darius said. Darius stood over him. The Sig Sauer pointed directly at Kane's face. The laser sight was a steady red dot, right between Kane's eyes. "Don't do it, son. It's over." Kane froze. He looked up at the old man. He saw the barrel of the gun. But more terrifying than the gun was the look in Darius's eyes. It wasn't hate. It was pity. "You!" Kane gasped, wheezing for air. "You ruined me." "You ruined yourself," Darius said. "Now, roll over, hands behind your back." "Or what?" Kane spat blood between his teeth. "You're going to kill me?" "Do it." "I'd rather be dead than—" Kane's hand twitched toward his belt. Bam! Darius fired. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the shoulder. The bullet tore through Kane's right shoulder, shattering the clavicle and rendering his gun arm useless. Kane screamed, a high, shrill sound that cut through the thunder. He writhed on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "I said," Darius repeated, his voice calm over the ringing in his ears. "Hands behind your back." Darius kicked the backup gun away. He pulled a pair of zip ties from his back pocket. He had prepared them and rolled the sobbing, bleeding Kane onto his stomach. He cinched the ties tight. "Quinn," Darius called out. "Call 911. Tell them we have an intruder down. Tell them to send an ambulance." Darius knelt beside Kane, who was crying now. The adrenaline gone, replaced by the agony of the gunshot wound. "It hurts," Kane sobbed. "It hurts." Darius pressed a clean towel from the dining table against the wound. applying pressure. I know. Darius's hands were steady as he saved the life of the man who tried to kill him. Pain is a great teacher, Grady. Try to listen to it. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm. The cavalry was coming, but the war was over. The chief had held the line. The trial of Harlan Kane was not just a legal proceeding. It was a public exorcism for the town of Oak Haven. The county courthouse was besieged by media vans from as far away as New York and Los Angeles. The headline was irresistible: The Retired Chief versus the Rogue Cop. Inside courtroom B, the air was stale and tense. Kane sat at the defense table, his arm in a complex sling, his face pale and gaunt. The arrogance that had defined him in the park was gone, replaced by a jittery, hunted look. His lawyer, a court-appointed defendant named Samuel Vance, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Darius Vale sat in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table. He wore his dress uniform, the midnight blue of the Detroit Police Department. Gold stars on the collar, his Medal of Valor gleaming on his chest. He didn't wear it for vanity. He wore it to remind the jury of what a real police officer looked like. Quinn Vale had been granted permission to assist the district attorney as a special consultant. She was the architect of Kane's destruction. Your Honor, Quinn said, pacing before the jury box during cross-examination. The defense claims that Mr. Kane acted in self-defense, that he entered the home of Darius Vale believing he was serving a warrant. But let's look at the facts. She turned to Kane, who was sweating on the witness stand. Mr. Kane, Quinn said, her voice sharp. Did you have a warrant? I had probable cause, Kane stammered. He was a threat. He was an elderly man sitting in his living room, Quinn corrected. You broke down his door in the dead of night. You were intoxicated. Your toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.18. That is twice the legal limit. You weren't serving a warrant, Mr. Kane. You were hunting. He had a gun! Kane shouted, losing his composure. He shot me. He shot you after you fired 3 rounds into his living room, Quinn said, projecting a photo of the bullet-riddled sofa on the screen. He shot you in the shoulder to neutralize the threat. He could have shot you in the head. He saved your life, didn't he? Kane looked down at his lap. I don't know. You don't know? Quinn walked closer. You are alive, Mr. Kane. That is how you know. My father, a man you called a vagrant, a criminal, and a thug, applied the tourniquet that kept you from bleeding out on his dining room floor. He showed you more mercies in 5 minutes than you showed this community in years. The jury was spellbound. The evidence was overwhelming. The dashcam footage of the broken tail light, the text messages from the Blue Shield chat log that the FBI had recovered, and the 911 call, where Kane could be heard screaming insults before the shooting started. But the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected witness. The prosecution called Sergeant Riley Jenkins to the stand. Sergeant, the district attorney asked, did Officer Kane ever express racially biased views in your presence? Jenkins took a deep breath. She looked at Kane, then at Darius. She chose the side of history. Yes, she said clearly, multiple times. He bragged about cleaning up the trash in the park. He referred to minority residents as invaders. I was too afraid to report him because his father was the former deputy mayor, but I'm not afraid anymore. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Kane's head snapped up, betrayal in his eyes. His shield was gone. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood up. His hands didn't shake. In the matter of the people versus Harlan Kane, we find the defendant on count 1. Attempted murder in the first degree, guilty. Count 2, aggravated assault, guilty. Count 3, deprivation of civil rights, guilty. Count 4, burglary with a deadly weapon, guilty. Judge Reynolds looked over his spectacles at Kane. Mr. Kane, you betrayed the public trust in the most vile manner possible. You used the badge as a shield for your own bigotry. You are sentenced to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. Kane slumped forward, sobbing into his good arm. The bailiffs moved in. As they hauled him away, he looked back at the gallery. He locked eyes with Darius. Darius didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded. A final, solemn closing of the book. The bus ride to Ironwood State Correctional Facility was the longest of Harlan Kane's life. Shackled hand and foot, chained to a metal bench alongside the very people he used to hunt, Kane stared out the wire mesh window at the passing world. He watched the trees blur by, realizing with a sickening lurch in his gut that he wouldn't see a tree without a fence in front of it for 25 years. He was processed in silence. The correctional officers didn't offer him the brotherhood nod he expected. To them, a dirty cop was worse than a criminal. He was a liability. He was stripped, searched, and issued a bright orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. Because of his former status, Kane was placed in administrative segregation, protective custody. But the inmates called it the hole. His cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, a concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet, a slit of a window that showed only a patch of gray sky. For a man who had thrived on the power of roaming the streets, the confinement was a special kind of psychological torture. For the first months, Kane held on to his rage. He paced the tiny cell like a caged wolf, muttering to himself. He blamed Darius Vale. He blamed the chief. He blamed the woke jury. He replayed the moment in the living room 1,000 times, convincing himself that he was the victim, that he was the one who had been wronged. But prison has a way of grinding down even the hardest stones. The isolation began to rot him from the inside out. He spent 23 hours a day alone. The 1 hour of recreation was spent in a solitary chain-link dog run, where he could smell the fresh air but couldn't touch the grass. From the general population yard, the taunts drifted over the fence like poison gas. "Yo, Officer 4922!" a voice would scream. Kane flinched every time they used his old badge number. "You comfortable in there? You want me to call a tow truck for your dignity? Hey, Kane, I got some birdseed for you. Come get it, boy." He was the most hated man in Ironwood. The white gangs rejected him because he was damaged goods and a traitor to the badge. The black and Latino gangs wanted his blood. He was an island in an ocean of sharks. Then came the day the protection failed. As the days in confinement stretched on, Kane was being escorted to the infirmary for a routine checkup on his gunshot wound. The bullet from Darius's gun had left him with a permanent ache, a throbbing reminder of the night he lost everything. The escort was a new guard, Officer Graves. Graves was young, bored, and unbeknownst to Kane, heavily in debt to a gang leader in C Block. As they walked down the long linoleum-lined corridor, connecting the housing unit to the medical wing, Graves stopped. "Hold up," Graves muttered, tapping his earpiece. "Radio check." He stepped around the corner, leaving Kane alone in the hallway. Kane frowned. "Hey, you can't leave me here," he said, his voice echoing off the cinder blocks. A heavy steel door at the end of the hall clicked. It hadn't been latched properly. Kane's heart hammered against his ribs. He heard the sound of boots, not the heavy rhythmic tread of guards, but the scuffing, hurried sound of inmates in canvas shoes. 3 men stepped into the hallway. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. In prison, reputation is everything, and taking down a dirty cop was a badge of honor. Kane recognized the leader, a massive man named Jamal, serving life for a robbery Kane's old partner had botched. "No," Kane whispered, backing up until his spine hit the cold wall. "Officer Graves, help!" There was no answer. The corridor was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the approaching footsteps. "You like making people get on the ground, don't you, Grady?" Jamal asked, his voice deceptively soft. "You like standing over them, making them feel small." Kane tried to raise his hands, but the shackles limited his movement. "Stay back. I'll scream." "Scream?" Jamal smiled. "It's soundproof." The beating was not chaotic. It was surgical. They didn't use shivs. They didn't want him dead. Death was too easy. They wanted to take away the one thing Kane valued most, his physical dominance. They knocked him down with a single punch. While he was on the ground gasping for air, Jamal grabbed Kane's ankles. "You walk tall on our streets," Jamal grunted. "Now you crawl." The stomp was precise. A heavy boot came down hard on the lower spine, right at the lumbar junction. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry branch snapping in a winter storm. Kane didn't scream. The air simply left his body in a jagged wheeze. A bolt of white-hot lightning tore through his back, followed instantly by a terrifying cold numbness that rushed down his legs. When the guards finally arrived minutes later, the hallway was empty. Kane was lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling lights, tears streaming silently down his face. He tried to move his legs. He commanded them to move. They didn't answer. When spring finally arrived in full bloom across Oak Haven, the air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine and wet earth. Darius Vale stood at a podium in the center of what used to be a vacant, trash-filled lot on the south side of the city, the poorest district, a place the police usually ignored unless they were looking for arrests. Today, the lot was transformed. A brand new building stood there, gleaming with glass and brick. A playground filled with laughing children stretched out behind it. Darius looked older, his hair now completely white, but he stood as straight as ever. Beside him stood Quinn, beaming, and Chief Nolan Callahan, who looked humbled and grateful. "Thank you all for coming," Darius said into the microphone. The crowd, a mix of neighborhood residents, city officials, and police officers, went silent. "A short time ago, darkness visited my home. A man tried to use fear to break this community. He thought the power came from a gun and a badge. He thought he could act with impunity because of who he was." Darius paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. "But justice is a funny thing. It doesn't just punish the wicked, it restores the balance. When we won the civil lawsuit against the city and the police union, my daughter asked me what I wanted to do with the money. It was a significant sum, millions of dollars meant to pay for the pain and suffering caused by Officer Kane." Darius turned and gestured to the building behind him. A heavy velvet curtain hung over the nameplate above the doors. "I didn't want the money," Darius said. "I wanted to ensure that no child in this neighborhood ever grows up thinking the only way to have power is to bully someone else. I wanted to turn a legacy of hate into a foundation of love." He nodded to Quinn. She pulled the cord. The velvet curtain fell away. The crowd gasped, then murmured, and, finally, a ripple of applause started that grew into a roar. The sign above the door read the Harlan Kane Center for Youth Development, dedicated to justice, equality, and community policing. "We used his name," Darius said, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. "We used every penny of his pension, his assets, and the settlement money to build this. Forevermore, the name Harlan Kane will not be associated with racism or police brutality. It will be the place where children learn to read, learn to play, and learn to respect one another. We took his name and we gave it to the people he hated. It was the ultimate victory." Darius hadn't just defeated Kane. He had rewritten his history. Miles away, in the recreation yards of the Ironwood Medical Unit, a wheelchair sat in the shadow of the high wall. Harlan Kane sat in the chair, a blanket draped over his useless legs. He looked 20 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by depression and medication. He held a crumpled newspaper in his lap. It was a week old. The headline read, "New Youth Center Opens, a Victory for Civil Rights." He saw the photo, Darius Vale cutting the ribbon, and above Darius's head, his own name, Kane, carved in stone, welcoming a diverse crowd of smiling children. Kane's hand shook as he stared at the image. He wanted to rip it up. He wanted to scream, but he had no fight left. The irony crushed him heavier than any boot. He was funding the very future he had tried to suppress. A bird landed on the chain-link fence in front of him, a sparrow. Kane looked at the bird. He remembered the park. He remembered the handcuffs. He remembered the feeling of the wind on his face when he could still walk. "Go away," Kane whispered, his voice cracking. The bird chirped, tilted its head, and flew away, soaring over the razor wire, free and unburdened. Kane watched it go, until it was just a speck in the vast blue sky. He gripped the wheels of his chair, turned himself around, and slowly, painfully rolled himself back toward his cage. In the end, this story shows us the true cost of hatred and the redemptive power of integrity. Darius Vale faced cruelty with calm strength and an unwavering commitment to what is right. Instead of seeking only revenge, he chose to build something lasting that would lift up the very community that had been targeted. Harlan Kane discovered that when you dig a grave for someone else, you often end up digging your own, and the weight of your choices can leave you trapped in ways you never imagined. Yet even in that darkness, there is a lesson about the human capacity for transformation. It reminds us that every action we take carries consequences, not just for others but for the soul we carry within. It teaches us that true authority comes from service and respect, not from fear or domination. And it shows that when good people stand firm with dignity and compassion, even the most bitter wounds can become the soil from which hope and justice grow. May we all strive to live with that kind of quiet courage, choosing kindness where we can, taking responsibility for our mistakes, and remembering that the legacy we leave is shaped by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. When we choose to build rather than destroy, we create ripples of light that can outlast even the longest night. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected grace moved you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment touched you the most? If it inspired you to reflect on the power of standing tall, give it a like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that doing the right thing matters. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, and always trust your gut when something feels wrong.